The house was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural even areas, though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Our parents had left earlier that morning for a weekend away, leaving my brother Jack and me alone for the first time in what felt like forever. Finally, Jack had stayed sprawling out on the couch as the sound of our parents' car disappeared down the driveway. He grinned at me, his eyes sparkling with mischief. No rules for 2 whole days. I rolled my eyes at him, though I couldn't help but smile. Jack always had this way of making everything feel lighter, easier. Yeah, because we're so rebellious, I teased, nudging him as I walked past to grab a drink from the kitchen. We spent the morning lounging around, watching TV and eating junk food like kids on summer vacation. It was nice, and for a while it felt like any other lazy day. But as the afternoon wore on, the energy in the house seemed to shift. It wasn't anything obvious, just a subtle tension that hung in the air, growing thicker with each passing hour. I first noticed it when Jack suggested we play video games. We sat on the floor in front of the TV, our knees brushing as we leaned into the competition. Every time he laughed or cursed at the screen, I found myself sneaking glances at him, drawn to the way his smile lit up his face or how his hair fell messily across his forehead. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. This was Jack, my brother. We'd grown up together, shared everything from toys to secrets, but now sitting so close to him, I couldn't ignore the way my stomach flipped every time he bumped my shoulder or flashed me that crooked grin. You okay? He asked, suddenly pulling me from my thoughts. He paused the game, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. You seem distracted. Yeah, fine, I said quickly, my cheeks heating under his gaze. Just tired, I guess. He didn't look convinced, but he shrugged it off and went back to the game. I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting, and by the time we called it quits, I was more flustered than ever. And that evening, as sun dipped below the horizon, Jack suggested we watch a movie, something scary, he said, grabbing a blanket and tossing it onto the couch. Seriously? I groaned, settling in next to him. You know we hate horror movies. Exactly, he said with a grin, pulling the blanket over both of us. That's what makes it fun. I rolled my eyes again, but didn't argue. The movie started, and as the opening credits rolled, I felt Jack shift closer, his shoulder pressing against mine. It was innocent enough, just a brother seeking warmth or comfort, but it sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the creepy music playing on the screen. The movie was intense, filled with jump scares and eerie silences that had me heart racing. At one particularly terrifying moment, I flinched, grabbing Jack's arm. Without thinking, he laughed, wrapping his arm around my shoulders and pulling me closer. Relax, he said, his voice warm and teasing. It's just a movie, shut up, I muttered, though I didn't pull away. His arm felt solid around me, grounding me in a way that both calmed and unsettled me. I could feel the heat of his body against mine, the steady rising fall of his chest, and it was almost enough to drown out the tension coiled in my stomach. Almost then, as the credits rolled, Jack stretched and let out a contented sigh. Told you it wouldn't be that bad, he said, smirking as he looked down at me. I scoffed, shoving him lightly. I nearly had a heart attack thanks to you, he laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You're such a wimp. I rolled my eyes, but couldn't help the smile tugging at my lips. Whatever, I'm going to bed. I'll hast, his tone somewhere between disappointment and surprise. It's barely midnight. Stay with me. Well, some of us need sleep, I said, standing and stretching. You should try it sometime. Yeah, he said, waving me off. But as I turned to leave, I felt his gaze linger, and when I glanced back, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, but yet I knew there was something happening between us. Lying in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The way he looked at me, the way his touch lingered. It wasn't just in my head. It couldn't be. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing as I replayed the day's events. My feelings for Jack were confusing enough, but now I couldn't ignore the possibility that he might feel the same, and that thought terrified me as much as it thrilled me. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain, things between us would never be threesome. The next morning, I woke to the smell of bacon wafting through the air. Groggy and still half asleep, I stumbled out of bed and made my way to the kitchen, where Jack was flipping pancakes at the stove. He looked up as I entered, flashing me that easy grin that always seemed to make my chest tighten. Morning, sleepyhead, he said, his tone light and teasing. Figured I'd make breakfast since you were too lazy to do it. I rolled my eyes, grabbing a mug and pouring myself a cup of coffee. You know, you're surprisingly domestic for someone who never cleans their room. Hey, I contain multitudes, he said with a wink, sliding a plate of pancakes onto the counter. Now sit and eat. You'll need your strength for later. For what? I asked, raising an eyebrow as I took a seat at the table. You'll see, he said, cryptically, turning back to the stove with a slismal. After breakfast, Jack led me out to the backyard, where the crisp morning air felt refreshing against my skin. He had dragged out the old basketball hoop from the garage and set it up on the driveway, a basketball bouncing idly in his hands. Come on, he said, tossing the ball to me. It's see if you still got it. I caught the ball, a grin spreading across my face. Despite myself growing up, we used to play basketball for horseshoeing each other to one-on-one matches that almost always ended in laughter or some petty argument. It had been years since we'd played, and the thought of reliving those memories brought a warmth to my chest. Fine, I say, dribbling the ball, but don't cry when I beat you, you wish, she said, moving toward like me. We played for what felt like hours, the sound of the ball bouncing against the pavement mingling with our laughter and the occasional trash talk. It was easy, natural, like slipping back into a familiar rhythm. But as the game wore on, the playful competition between us started to shift. Jack was always physical when we played, using his size and strength to his advantage, but today his touches lingered, a hand on my back as he tried to block me, his arm brushing against mine. When he stole the ball, it was subtle, but it sent sparks through me every time. By the time we called it quits, both of us were breathless and sweaty, our faces flushed from exertion. I collapsed onto the grass, staring up at the sky as my heart raced, not just from the game, but from the way Jack's presence seemed to consume me. You're getting slow, he teased, flopping down beside me. His arm brushed against mine, and I fought the urge to lean into him. Speak for yourself, I shot back, trying to keep my voice steady. I let you win, held his head tilting back as the sound filled the air. It was a sound I'd heard 1,000 times before, but now it made my stomach twist in ways I didn't understand. For a while, we just lay there in silence, the tension between us building like a storm cloud on the horizon. I could feel his gaze on me, and when I finally turned to look at him, his expression was serious, almost hesitant. What I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing against mine where they rested on the grass. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent a jolt through me, left me breathless. Jack, I said, my throat tight. What are you doing? I don't now, he admitted, his voice low and unsteady. But this feels different, doesn't it? Like something's changed. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Yeah, I said finally. It does. For a moment, neither of us moved, the space between us charged with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. Then slowly Helen closer, his face inches from mine. I should have pulled away. I should have stopped him. But instead I closed the distance between us, my lips meeting his in a kiss that was as tentative as it was electrifying. The kiss was brief, a fleeting moment that left us both breathless and staring at each other in stunned silence. Jack's eyes searched mine, his expression a mix of confusion and something deeper, something I didn't dare name. He started, but I cut him off, me voice trembling. We shouldn't have done that, I know, he said quickly, though his voice lacked conviction. But I don't regret it. I looked away, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. This was Jack, my brother. This was wrong, wasn't it? And yet the thought of pulling away from him, of pretending like nothing had happened, felt impossible. Jack, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What are we doing? Don't know, he admitted, his hand brushing against mine again. But I think this is something we can't ignore. No, you're right. We can't, I say, but we also don't have to write. I don't know, I just don't know. It kind of excites me, to be honest. But I think that's wrong, he mentioned. Why does they've to be wrong? And even if it is wrong, no one is around who would find out. I said, yeah, you're right, he said, but let's leave it for now and see where this leads us to. Okay. I nodded. The rest of the day passed in a haze, the weight of what had happened between us hanging heavy in the air. We didn't talk about it directly anyway, but everything felt different. The way Jack looked at me, the way he lingered just a little too long when he passed by me, the way his hand brushed mine when we sat side by side on the couch. It was as if that kiss had opened a door we couldn't close, and no, we're both too afraid to step through it or to step away. By the time even ingled around, the tension between us was almost unbearable. We made dinner together, a simple pasta dish that neither of us really paid much attention to. Jack stood close to me as we cooked, his shoulder brushing mine. Every soup and each touch sent a jolt through me, a reminder of the moment we'd shared earlier. So Jack said, finally breaking the silence as he stirred the sauce, are we just going to pretend nothing happened? I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I hadn't expected him to bring it up, not so soon anyway. I don't know, I said carefully, keeping my eyes fixed on the pot of boiling water in front of me. Do you want to know? He said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't. I looked up at him, then my stomach twisting at the vulnerability in his expression. Jack, this is complicated, he finished for me, setting the spoon down and turning to face me fully. I know, but it doesn't feel wrong, does it? His words hit me like a punch to the gut, because he was right, as I wanted to deny it, to push him away and pretend like none of this was happening. I couldn't ignore the way he made me feel, the way my heart raced when he looked at me, the way my skin tingled when he touched me. It didn't feel wrong, it felt inevitable. No, I admitted, finale, voice barely audible. It doesn't. For a moment we just stood there, the sound of bubbling sauce and the hum of the refrigerator, the only noises in the room. Then slowly Jack reached out, his hand brushing against mine. We don't have to figure it all out right now, he said, his tone Gentle, but can we at least stop pretending it's not there? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He gave me a small tentative smile before turning back to the stove, and I let out a shaky breath, my chest aching with a mixture of fear and relief. Then, after dinner, we're treated to the living room, the tension between us still palpable, but softened somehow by the conversation in the kitchen. We sat on the couch side by side, the glow of the TV casting flickering shots across the room. Jack stretched his arm along the back of the couch, his fingers just barely brushing against my shoulder. "What do you want to watch?" he asked, his voice casual, though I could hear the edge of nervousness beneath it. "I don't care," I said, leaning back against the cushions. "You pick." He flipped through the channels for a while before settling on some action movie we'd seen a dozen times before. I barely paid attention to the screen, my mind too preoccupied with the way his arm rested so close to me, the way his presence seemed to fill every inch of the room. About halfway through the movie, I felt Jack shift beside me. His arm moved from the back of the couch to rest across my shoulders, pulling me closer to him. I stiffened for a moment, my heart racing, but then I relaxed, letting myself lean into him. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine." But I wasn't anything but fine. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, guilt, longing, but beneath it all was a sense of rightness, of belonging that I couldn't ignore. Stayed like that for the rest of the movie, his arm around me, my head resting against his shoulder. By the time the credits rolled, the tension between us had shifted again, growing heavier, more charged. I could feel the heat radiating off his body, the steady rise and fall of his chest, and it was driving me crazy. "Jack," I said finally, my voice shaky. I had turned to look at me, his eyes searching mine. "What? I don't know," I admitted, my cheeks burning. "This United States, it's intense," he said, finishing my sentence for me. He gave me a small crooked smile, his hand brushing against my arm. "But you're not running away?" "No," I said, my voice firm despite the nerves twisting in my stomach. "I'm not." He studied me for a moment, his gaze softening. Can I kiss you again?" My breath hitched, my heart pounding in my chest. I nodded, unable to find the words to speak, and he leaned in, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was both tender and electrifying. The kiss deepened slowly, naturally, as if we'd been holding ourselves back for too long and had finally let go of whatever tethered used to hesitation. Jack's hand slid up to cradle the back of my neck, his fingers warm and firm against my skin. My own hands found their way to his shoulders, gripping them as if I needed to anchor myself to something real, something solid. We pulled apart after a moment, both of us breathless. His forehead rested against mine, his eyes closed as he whispered, "This feels too good to stop." Nodded, unable to trust my voice. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, fear, exhilaration, but my body responded with an urgency that drowned out everything else. It wasn't just about that physical connection, it was the way he made me feel seen, understood, and wanted in a way that I'd never experienced before. Jack leaned back slightly, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and filled with genuine concern. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm okay." "Good," he said, his lips quirking into a small smile before he leaned in again. This time the kiss was more confident, more deliberate. His hands moved down my back, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. The warmth of his body against mine was intoxicating, and I couldn't help but let out a soft sigh. His lips trailed from my mouth to my jaw, then down to the sensitive spot just below my ear. "Jack," I whispered, my fingers tangling in his hair. He murmured, his lips still pressed against my skin. "This is a lot," I admitted, my voice trembling. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his expression soft but serious. "We can stop," he said. "If it's too much, we can't stop." I shook my head, my heart pounding. "I don't want to stop. I don't know what this means." "Neither do I," he admitted, his thumb brushing gently against my cheek. "But I know I don't want this to be the last time." I swallowed hard, his words sending a shiver down my spine. "Me neither, but I like it. Please continue." After I had said that, he grabbed me harder this time, and it seemed as if a bomb exploded. We both let ourselves go in the moment, and we noticed it from each other while he was grabbing me in places he had never touched me before. "Didn't stop, Jack," I said, "and he definitely didn't." Wow, this was my first time doing this, and I had never expected it. Was with my brother. While Jack was busy, I quite often had to ask him to stop for a small moment. But he told me that was okay. He let me feel comfortable, and it seemed as if he had done it more often. After he reached his top, he kissed me in my neck, asking me if I was okay. I nodded, but I needed a moment for myself. Well, I walked away slowly. He said, "This isn't over, is it?" "No, it definitely isn't. We still have some time left this weekend." And this was amazing. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of quiet conversation and lingering touches. We didn't talk about what had happened, what was happening, but the tension between us remained a constant hum in the background. By the time we decided to call it a K, and I felt both exhilarated and drained, my emotions a tangled mess. "Good night," Jack said, as we stood in the hallway outside. Our bedrooms, his voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure if he should say more good night. I replied, my cheeks flushing as his eyes lingered on mine. For a moment it seemed like he was going to kiss me again, but then he stepped back, giving me a small, almost shy smile, before disappearing into his room. I stood there for a long time, my heart racing, as I replayed the events of the day. In my mind, sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned, my thoughts racing, as I tried to make sense of everything. Was this just a fleeting moment of weakness, a mistake that we'd both regret, or was it something more, something that we couldn't ignore or push away? I didn't have any answers, but one thing was clear, I couldn't go back to the way things were not after this. The sound of a soft knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. I sat up, my heart skipping a beat, as I called out, "Come in." The door opened slowly, and Jack stepped inside, his expression nervous, but determined. I couldn't sleep, he admitted, closing the door behind him. I kept thinking about you, about us. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. He crossed the room to sit on the edge of my bed. Me too, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached out his hand, finding mine in the dim light. I don't know what this means, he said, echoing my earlier words, but I know he don't want to pretend like it didn't happen. Neither do I, admitted, my fingers tightening around his. But what do we do now? He was silent for a moment, his thumb brushing against the back of my hand. We take it one step at a time, he said finally. No pressure, no expectations, just see where this goes. And nodded, my chest aching with a mixture of fear and hope. Okay, I said softly, one step at a time. Jack stayed with me that night, his presence a comforting weight beside me. As we lay together in the dark, we didn't say much, but the silence between us felt easy, natural, as if word found a new kind of understanding. His hand rested on mine, his thumb trick ring idle patterns against my skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. The quiet of the room wrapped around us like a cocoon, and though the world outside still turned, it felt as though time had stopped just for us. Jack's hand remained in mine, his stouch grounding me as my heart continued its frantic rhythm. I could feel his breathing slow and steady, and it calmed me in ways I didn't think possible. Neither of us spoke for a long while, the weight of the moment too delicate to disturb. But eventually Jack shifted closer, his voice breaking the silence. Do you regret it? He asked softly, his words tentative, as though he were afraid of the answer. I turned my head to look at him, our faces just inches apart in the dim light of my bedroom. No, I said honestly. Do you? He shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Not even for a second. A warmth spread through my chest at his words, dispelling the lingering doubt that had clung to me. I let out a soft breath, my fingers tightening around his. Then what happens now? Jack's gaze softened, his thumb brushing gently against the back of my hand. Now we figure it out, he said simply. Together, the simplicity of his answer brought me a strange sense of comfort. It didn't matter that we didn't have all the answers, that the path ahead was uncertain. What mattered was that we were in this together, that neither of us was running from whatever it was we had found in each other. The next morning, the house was filled with a quiet stillness. As we woke up together, Jack had stayed the whole night, his arm slung casually over my waist. As we lay side by side on the bed, it felt natural, as though we'd been doing this for years, instead of it being the first time. As the sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting the room in soft golden hues, Jack stirred beside me, his eyes fluttering. Open. Morning, he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. Morning, I replied, my heart fluttering at the way he looked at me, his gaze warm and unguarded. For a moment, neither of us moved, content to just exist in the quiet of the morning. But eventually Jack let out a soft sigh, his hand brushing against mine. We should probably get up, said, though he made no move to leave the bed. Yeah, I said, though I made no move either. We stayed like that for a little while longer, the world outside our door feeling distant and unimportant. It wasn't until the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the tranquility that we finally scrambled to our feet. Mom and Dad are back, Jack said, his voice tinged with panic. He glanced out the window. My stomach dropped at his words, the reality of our situation crashing down around us. What do we do? Act normal, he said, his tone firm despite the worrying in his eyes. We can't let them suspect anything, I nodded, swallowing hard as I tried to push down the wave of anxiety threatening to consume me. Okay. The rest of the day passed in a blur, the normally of our family routine, feeling almost surreal after everything that had happened between us. But despite the tension simmering beneath the surface, Jack and I managed to keep up the facade, falling back into our roles as brothers without missing a beat. It wasn't until later that evening, when the house had grown quiet and our parents had gone to bed, that we found ourselves alone again. Jack cornered me in the kitchen, his expression serious. He leaned against the counter. I meant what I said last night, he said, his voice low but firm. I don't regret any of it. I met his gaze, my heart skipping a beat at the intensity in his eyes. Neither do I, he smiled, thin, a soft, genuine smile that made my chest ache. Good, he said, reaching out to brush his fingers against mine, because I don't want this to be the end. Me neither, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. We stood there for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened between us pressing down on us, but instead of feeling overwhelming, it felt freeing, like we'd finally found something we hadn't even known we were looking for. Over the next few days, we fell into a delicate rhythm, navigating the uncharted territory of our relationship with a mixture of caution and excitement. There were stolen glances across the dinner table, fleeting touches when no one was looking, and late-night conversations in the safety of our rooms. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt and fear, but through it all, we held on to each other, knowing that whatever we faced, we would face it together. And as I lay in bed one night, Jack's hand intertwined with mine, as we talked quietly about everything and nothing, I realized that this, whatever it was worth fighting for, because no matter how complicated or messy or forbidden it might seem, it was ours. And that wasn't one quiet night in the living room erased the invisible line between us, reshaping everything with just one touch. Growing up, my younger brother Luke was always by my side, tagging along no matter where I went. He was the typical little brother, always curious, always wanting to be included. Even as we grew older, when most siblings drifted apart, he stayed close. Perhaps it was the constant chaos of our family sticking together felt like the only way to make it through. But lately things felt different. Luke had changed. It wasn't something I could put my finger in easily. It was more like a series of small fleeting moments that seemed too subtle to call out. His jokes weren't quite the same, his glances seemed to linger, and his presence felt heavier somehow. It was as if a stranger had quietly stepped into the shoes of my little brother, though I couldn't say who. That evening, with our parents away on a weekend trip, it was just the two of us. The house was unusually silent, and a storm outside only made the silence feel more intense. I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone when Luke came in with 2 cups of tea. Thought you might want one, he said, handing it to me. With a soft smile, I took it, smiling back, though I could feel that strange tension again. Thanks, Luke, I replied, trying to keep things casual, as if the strange air between us wasn't there. He sat beside me a little closer than usual, the cushion sinking slightly under his weight. We made small talk for a while about things that didn't really matter: the weather, a new movie he'd watched, funny stories from school. But underneath it, I could sense something unspoken, something hanging between us that I couldn't quite put a name to. I tried to laugh it off, blaming my overactive imagination, but I knew that wouldn't shake the feeling. Remember that summer we spent at the lake house? He asked, suddenly, his voice low. Yeah, I replied, smiling. How could I forget? You practically lived in water. Luke chuckled, his eyes warm with the memory. I remember you were so patient with me, teaching me how to swim even though I was terrible at it. A lot. You were terrible, but hey, I loved it. It was one of my favorite summers. The silence that followed was heavy. Luke looked at me, his gaze soft, earthen. I was used to his hand rested on the couch just a bit closer to mine than I expected, his fingers brushing mine lightly as he shifted. For a moment, I felt the air around us thicken, my heart beat faster, and I wasn't sure why. This was Luke, my little brother, the kid I'd taught how to swim, who had pestered me with a million questions growing up. But sitting there with him, his eyes locked on mine, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Do you ever think about how things might have been if we didn't have all the chaos? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I glanced down, not sure how to respond. Our family was complicated, to say the least. We had our fair share of turmoil, arguments, broken promises, nights spent hoping things would change. It had made us close in ways most siblings weren't, but I wondered now if maybe we were too close sometimes, I admitted, looking away, my gaze settling on the window where raindrops trail lines down the glass. But it's not something we can change, right? All we can do is live with it. Yeah, he replied, though there was a strange sadness in his voice. But sometimes I wish it could be different. I turned back to him, surprised. His eyes were dark, thoughtful, filled with something I didn't quite recognize. A soft flash of lightning illuminated the room for a second, and I noticed the way his hand was now just barely touching mine, his fingers lightly grazing my knuckles. I pulled my hand back, instinctively forcing a laugh to break the tension. Look at us getting all deep and sentimental. We sound so grown up. Luke smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Guess we've been through a lot. I nodded, and the silence returned. I felt an urge to change the topic, to bring us back to the easy laughter we used to share. But every time it reached, I felt that weight again, that lingering tension I couldn't quite shake. Storm outside was growing louder, rain beating against the windows as thunder rumbled in the distance. It was strange how the noise seemed to bring the silence inside into sharper focus, as if each drop of rain emphasized that quiet between us. I don't want you to feel like you have to take care of me, hesitated, his voice barely audible over the sound of the brain. I want us to take care of each other. I looked at him, surprised by the intensity in his eyes. He reached out, his hand resting lightly on mine. his thumb brushing over my knuckles in a gesture so tender it almost hurt. There was something in the way he looked at me that made my heart skip, something that felt both comforting and unsettling all at once. I wanted to pull away, to laugh it off, to break the tension somehow, booty couldn't. I was frozen, trapped in his gaze, feeling my pulse race as his fingers traced gentle circles on my hand. It's late, I finally managed to say, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. We should probably get some sleep. He nodded, though he didn't move right away, his eyes still fixed on mine. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something that might change everything, but he just gave me a small sad smile and stood up. "Good night," murmured, his hand slipping from mine as he turned and walked down the hall, his footsteps soft against the wooden floor. I watched him go, my heart pounding in my chest, the strange weight of evening settling over me like a blanket I couldn't shake off. The sound of his door closing echoed in the quiet, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The memories of his touch, the look in his eyes, the words he hadn't said lingering in the darkness. As I sat there in the silence, staring at the empty hallway, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. Something was changing, something I couldn't quite name, but I knew deep down that things would never be the same. And somehow I wasn't sure if he wanted them to be. The days that followed that evening were marked by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to hang between us, filling every interaction with a tension that wasn't there before. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking things, that this was just another phase, but no matter how much I tried to brush it off, I couldn't forget the way Luke had looked at me, the feel of his hand on mine, the quiet longing I thought I'd seen in his eyes. I was on edge, constantly aware of his presence, hyper aware of every glance, every small touch that felt heavier now. I'd catch myself watching him out of the corner of my eye, wondering what he was thinking, wondering if he felt it too. Both was as unreadable as ever, calm and casual as if nothing had changed. It was maddening. One afternoon, as I was heading to my room, I found him sitting on the floor outside, his back against the wall, a notebook open on his knees. He looked up as I approached, his expression guarded, as if he'd been waiting for me. He said quietly, his gaze steady. "Got a minute?" I nodded, unsure of what to expect, my heart pounding. As I sat down beside him, the silence stretched between us, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, barely more than a whisper. "I know things have been weird," he began, his eyes fixed on the floor between us. And I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." I swallowed, feeling a strange mix of relief and tension. "It's okay, Luke. I'm just trying to figure things out." He nodded, still not looking at me. "I don't want to make things harder for you. I don't know how to handle this." There was the unspoken truth hanging in the air, the thing neither of us had dared to say aloud. I felt my pulse quicken, the weight of his words settling over me like a blanket. He wanted to say something, anything, to ease the tension, but the words caught in my throat. Without thinking, I reached out, placing my hand on his. It was a small gesture, but it felt like crossing a linear boundary we'd never questioned before. His fingers tightened around mine, and for a moment we sat there in silence, our hands entwined, the world around us fading away. I could feel the heat of his skin, the gentle pressure of his hand holding mine, and it felt safe. And yet it was a kind of safety that felt dangerous, a strange contradiction I couldn't quite understand. "I don't know what to do," he murmured, his voice filled with a vulnerability I'd never seen before. I looked at him, my heart racing, the air between us charged with an energy I couldn't ignore. Neither do I. Our gaze locked, and for a moment everything else fell away, the rules, the expectations, the voices in our heads telling us this wasn't right. All that remained was the quiet understanding between us, the realization that something had changed, something we couldn't take back. That evening, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation over and over in my mind. Every word, every glance, every touch felt etched into my memory, each one pulling me deeper into a place I knew I shouldn't go. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself to let it go, the pull was too strong, too overwhelming. The next morning, I tried to keep things normal. I got up, went through usual routine, keeping my thoughts tightly controlled, determined to put everything back in its place. But when I walked into the kitchen, there was Luke standing by the counter, his expression tense. He looked at me, his gaze searching, as if he was trying to read my mind, to see if I was feeling the same unbearable weight pressing down on me. I forced myself to smile, to pretend like everything was fine. "But he didn't return it. Are you avoiding me?" he asked, his voice steady, but his eyes full of uncertainty. I hesitated, caught off guard by his directness. "No, I don't know what to say." His shoulders slumped slightly, and he nodded, looking away. "I get it. It's complicated." The word hung in the air between us, inadequate to describe the mess we were in. I wanted to tell him that I felt the same way, that I was just as confused, just as lost, but saying it aloud would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that. As the days passed, the tension only grew. Every moment we spent together felt charged like a tightly wound spring, ready to snap. I could feel his presence in every room, every glance, every accidental brush of his hand against mine, and with each passing day it became harder and harder to pretend that nothing was happening. One evening after dinner, we found ourselves alone in the living room. Our parents were out again, leaving us in the familiar silence. It had grown heavy with unspoken words. I sat on the couch, my eyes fixed on Thief, though I wasn't really watching. Luke sat beside me close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, his presence overwhelming the silence stretched between us, each second amplifying the tension until it felt unbearable. I could feel my heart racing, me hands trembling slightly as I fought the urge to look at him, to say something, anything to break the silence. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't keep pretending, you know." He turned to him, startled, my breath catching in my throat. He was looking at me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and longing that mirrored my own. "The neither," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He reached out, his hand brushing mine, the touch sending a shiver down my spine. We sat there frozen in that moment, our hands barely touching, but the connection between us feeling stronger than anything I'd ever known. For a moment, I wanted to pull away to break the spell that had wrapped around us, but something in his gaze held me in place, a silent plea that I couldn't ignore. I felt myself weaken, the walls I'd built around myself crumbling as I let myself lean closer just enough to feel his breath against my skin. "I don't know how to stop this," he murmured, his voice filled with a vulnerability that made my heart ache. I looked at him, my pulse racing, every nerve in my body alive with a tension that felt both terrifying and thrilling. Maybe we don't have that." The words hung in the air between us, a tentative offer, a step into the unknown. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the conflict, but there was something else to, a spark, a quiet determination that made my heart race. He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek, his touch so gentle it felt like a whisper. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand, the soft brush of his tongue against my skin, and for a moment I let myself forget everything else. There was only this moment, this touch, this connection that felt as natural as breathing. But the silence that followed was thick, heavy with the realization of what we'd done, the line we'd crossed. I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze, and saw the same mixture of fear and desire that I felt, a reflection of the confusion swirling inside me. We can't do this," I whispered. How even as I said the words, I felt a pang of regret, a longing I couldn't ignore. "No," he replied, his voice rough, his hand dropping from my cheek, but hadn't pulled away, didn't leave. Instead he stayed, his eyes locked on mine, his gaze filled with an intensity that made my heart ache. We sat there, the silence between us more powerful than any words, a silent acknowledgement of the feelings we couldn't deny, the boundaries we'd crossed. I knew deep down that this was a path we shouldn't go down, a line we shouldn't have crossed it, but in that moment, with his gaze holding mine, I felt an undeniable pull, a longing that wouldn't be as silenced, and I knew with a certainty that terrified me that this was only the beginning. The next evening, a quiet tension filled the house, thick and palpable. The air seemed charged, as if waiting for something to happen, something inevitable. Luke and I moved around each other in the living room, pretending to watch a movie, though neither of us was truly focused on the screen. My mind was elsewhere, on the weight of his glances, the way his presence seemed to fill every corner of the room as the movie droned on in the background. I felt my heart beat fast, with familiar fluttering in my chest returning with a force I could no longer ignore. I stole a glance at Luke, who was leaning back on the couch beside me, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the screen, his expression unreadable. There was a tension in his posture, a quiet intensity that matched the racing of my own thoughts. Finally, unable to stand the silence any longer, I turned to him, my voice barely a whisper. "Luke, are you okay?" He looked at me, his eyes darker than usual, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice soft, almost vulnerable. "I keep thinking about us, about what's happening." His words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. My breath caught as I felt his gaze settle on me, his eyes searching mine as if looking for answers. Slowly he reached over, his hand resting on top of mine, his fingers warm and steady. I felt me pulse quicken, the touch sending a shiver down my spine. I didn't pull away, couldn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into the warmth of his hand, my fingers curling around his, holding on to the moment as if it were something precious, fragile. There was a kind of silence that filled the room, a quiet understanding that needed no words. He moved closer, his arm brushing against mine, his presence overwhelming. I could feel his breath warm and steady as he looked at me, his gaze intense, soon wavering, and before I knew it, he lifted his hand, brushing a strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering against my cheek. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, his eyes searching mine for permission. I nodded, barely able to find me voice, my heart racing as I felt his hand on my face, his touch soft, gentle. My eyes closed for a moment, savoring The warmth, the closeness, the way his hand felt against my skin, it was a feeling I'd never experienced before, a kind of comfort, mixed with the excitement, something both familiar and new. Then almost hesitantly, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a soft, tentative kiss. It was a kiss that felt like a question, an unspoken request for something more, something deeper. My breath hitched as I leaned into him, my own lips responding, answering his silent question with a quiet certainty that surprised even me. Kiss deepened, slow and gentle each moment, unfolding like a secret. His hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and I felt myself surrendering to the warmth, the tenderness, the feeling of being completely and utterly wrapped up in him. There was a quiet intensity to the way he held me, a kind of gentleness that made my heart ache. Our breaths mingled as the kiss continued, each touch, each movement growing more assured, more certain. It was as if we were discovering something hidden between us, something that had always been there waiting to be uncovered. I could feel the beat of his heart, steady and strong, matching the rhythm of my own, a silent promise in that darkness. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine, his eyes closed, his breathing heavy. For a moment, we stayed like that, caught in the stillness, neither of us daring to speak, to break the fragile quiet that had settled over us. I've wanted this for so long, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I just didn't know how to say it. Reached up, my fingers brushing his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin, the roughness of his stubble. Me too, I admitted, my voice barely audible. But I didn't think you felt threesome. He opened his eyes, his gaze intense, filled with a quiet determination. I've tried to hide it, to pretend it wasn't there, but I can't anymore. I don't want to pretend. His words sent a thrill through me, a quiet affirmation of everything I'd been feeling, the emotions I'd been trying to hide. I felt myself smile, a soft, almost shy smile, as I looked at him, my hand resting on his cheek, my heart filled with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. He leaned in again, his lips finding mine. The kiss deeper this time, filled with a quiet urgency, a need that neither of us could deny. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself melting into him, into the moment, into the feeling of being completely and utterly consumed by him. It was as if the universe condensed to this singular moment, the world outside, rules and expectations dissolving into insignificance. All that existed was the gentle pressure of his touch, the warmth of his gaze, and the profound sense of being seen, understood, and cherished. His hand traced the curve of me back, sending shivers down my spine. I instinctively drew closer, my finger-centered wing, with his our body swaying in perfect harmony. Time lost all meaning as we surrendered to the intensity of the moment. Our heartbeats synchronized, a soothing melody that resonated deep within. I felt the rush of emotions, the thrill of connection, and the security of being enveloped in his presence. In this fleeting instant, we were unstoppable, untethered, and unguarded. Our connection tranced words, a symphony of emotions, playing in perfect sync. The closeness was exhilarating, yet terrifying, like standing on the precipice of a new dawn. Yet in his arms, I found solace, a sense of belonging that defied explanation. When we finally pulled back, breathing heavily, he looked at me, his gaze filled with a mixture of wonder and awe, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. I don't know where this is going, he admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper, but I don't want to stop. I don't want to go back. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of certainty settle over me. Neither do I. We sat there in the quiet, our hands still intertwined, a sense of peace filling the room, a quiet assurance that no matter what came next, we would face it together. It was a feeling that was both comforting and terrifying, a realization that this was something we couldn't ignore, couldn't run from. Silence stretched, uncomfortable and filled with unspoken promises. I felt his thumb brush over my knuckles, a small tender gesture that made my heart ache with a quiet joy. It was as if in that moment everything else faded away, leaving only the two of us caught in a world of our own making. As the night wore on, we stayed close, our quiet whispers filling the darkness, a silent conversation of shared glances and gentle touches, each one deepening the bond between us, each one pulling us closer. It was a closeness that felt both new and familiar, a connection that had been waiting in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to come to life. And no, there was no turning back. The days that followed felt like a blur, filled with stolen moments, quiet conversations, and a connection that seemed to grow stronger with every shared glance. Lukined, I moved around each other with a new understanding, an unspoken promise that neither of us had to voice aloud. It was as if a door had opened between us, leading to a place we'd never dared to imagine. A place that felt forbidden, and yet strangely right. Each day, we found ourselves drawn to each other in ways that were hard to ignore, passing each other in the hallway, a brush of hands in the kitchen, a lingering look that seemed to say everything we couldn't put into words. I felt my heart race whenever he was near, a feeling that was both exhilarating and terrifying, a reminder of how much had changed between us. An evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow through few windows, I found myself sitting with Luke in the backyard, watching as the world grew quiet. The air was cool, and a soft breeze stirred the leaves, filling the silence with a gentle rustling that somehow made the moment feel even more intimate. Luke glanced over at me, his expression soft, a small smile playing at corners of his mouth. "I never thought we'd be here," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Neither did I replied, a sense of wonder filling me. "I don't regret it." He reached out his hand, finding mine, his fingers warm and steady. "Me neither." For a while, we sat there hand in hand, watching as the sky darkened, stars beginning to appear one by one. It felt like we were in a world of our own, a place untouched by reality where nothing else mattered but that quiet connection between us. It was a peace I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging that filled me with a quiet joy. But as the days passed, reality began to creep back in a quiet reminder that the world outside was still there waiting. I started to feel the weight of our secret, the unspoken tension of what would become. I knew that our lives couldn't stay in this hidden corner forever, that sooner or later we would have to face the consequences of what we'd found. One afternoon, as we were sitting together in the living room, the quiet ticking of the clock seemed louder than usual, each tick a reminder of time slipping away. I turned to Luke, a knot of worrying twisting in my chest. "Luke, what are we going to do?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He looked at me, his expression thoughtful, a sadness in his eyes that mirrored my own. "I don't know," he admitted, his hand reaching for mine, "but whatever happens, we'll face it together." His words brought a sense of comfort, a reassurance that eased the knot in my chest. If only for a moment, I nodded, holding on to his hand as if it were a lifeline, grounding me in a reality that felt as fragile as a dream. That evening, as I lay in bed, my mind racing with thoughts of what led ahead, I realized just how much he meant to me, how deeply he'd become a part of my life. And with that realization came a sense of fear, a quiet dread that gnawed at me, reminding me that everything we had was balanced on a delicate edge, a line we couldn't cross without risking everything. The following days were filled with a quiet tension and undercurrent of uncertainty that neither of us dared to address. We went through the motions of our routines, pretending that everything was the same, that our lives hadn't been irrevocably changed. But every glance, every touch, every quiet moment together reminded me that this was no longer just a passing phase, that this was something deeper, something that had taken root in my heart. One night, as we sat together on the porch, the stars twinkling above us, I felt a surge of emotion, a need to say something, to put into words the feelings that had been building inside me. "Luke," I began, my voice barely more than a whisper, "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if we can keep going like this." He looked at me, his gaze filled with understanding, a sadness that echoed my own. "I know," he replied softly, "but whatever happens, you'll always have a place in my heart." His words filled me with a bittersweet ache, a sense of longing that I couldn't ignore. I knew that what we had was rare, something precious, but it was also something that couldn't last, a fleeting moment that would eventually fade away. And yet, in that moment, with his hand in mine, I felt a quiet peace, a certainty that no matter what came next, I would carry this memory with me, a part of him forever etched into my heart. As the days turned into weeks, I felt the weight of our secret growing heavier, the quiet knowledge that this was something we couldn't keep hidden forever. We began to pull back, aslant understanding that this was a chapter that would soon have to close, a story that would remain ours, locked away in the quiet spaces of our hearts. One evening, as we sat together in the dim light of the living room, I looked at Luke, a sense of finality settling over me. "I think it's time we let go," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. He nodded, a sadness in his eyes, but also a quiet acceptance. "Maybe you're right," he replied, his hand resting on mine, "but that doesn't mean this wasn't real. It doesn't mean it didn't matter." We sat there in silence, our hands intertwined, a shared understanding that this was a moment we would both carry with us, a memory that would remain even if the world around us moved on. As I looked at him, a tear slipped down my cheek, a quiet acknowledgement of the loss of the ending that we both knew was inevitable. He reached up, wiping the tear away, his touch gentle, a final act of tenderness that felt like a goodbye. In the days that followed, we slowly drifted apart, a quiet distance settling between us, a space filled with the echoes of everything we'd shared. We went back to our routines, our lives intertwining in quieter, subtler ways, as siblings, as friends, as to people who had shared something that would never be spoken of again. But even as we returned to the roles the world expected of us, I knew that what we had was something rare, something that had changed me in ways I couldn't fully understand. And though we didn't speak of it, I could feel that he carried it with him, to a quiet reminder of a time when we'd let our hearts lead, even if only for a fleeting moment. In the years that followed, our lives took us in different directions, paths that diverged yet always seemed to lead back to each other. There was a comforting knowing that he was there, a steady presence, a quiet assurance that no matter what, we always have that unspoken bond. And though the memory of those days faded over time, growing softer, quieter, it remained a part of me, a quiet echo that reminded me of the person I'd been, of the love we'd shared. However briefly, some things I realized are meant to be treasured, quietly carried in the heart, like a secret, a memory that only grows more precious with time, and the life moved on carrying us with it. That part of my heart would always be his, a quiet corner that no one else would ever touch. We never spoke of it again. It became our silent understanding, our shared history, a chapter that would remain forever, ours locked away in the quiet spaces of memory. And though our lives had moved forward, through the years had changed us, I knew that he would always be a part of me, as I was a part of him. It was a love that needed no words, no explanations, just the quiet certainty that we had been there, that we had loved, even if only in the silence of our own hearts. That night began with a familiar quiet, but beneath the surface everything was on the verge of changing forever. It started like any other night, but little did I know everything between us was about to shift. Looking back now, it feels like every moment before had been pushing us toward that one point, the night that changed everything. Liam and I had always been closer than most brothers, being twins. People always assumed we were the same thoughts, some habits, same personalities, but we weren't. Not really. Liam was always the louder, bolder one, while I liked to hang back, observe. We were a mirror image of each other in appearance, but when it came to who we were inside, it was as if we were looking through warpage glass. Our parents had gone out of town for the weekend. It was supposed to be a regular Friday night, just me and him at home, but things never stayed regular. When we were together for too long, the house felt emptier, quieter than usual. Maybe that's why the energy between us felt different that night, like there was an unspoken charge and fear, something neither of us could name, but both could feel. We'd spend most of the evening in the living room pretending to watch a movie. I say pretending because I couldn't tell you it was happening on the screen. My mind was somewhere else entirely, and if I'm honest, it was on him. I stole glances whenever I thought he wasn't looking, but every time our eyes met, it felt like he'd been doing the same. He would smile, that lopsided grin that always made it hard for me to look away, and I'd force myself to focus back on the TV, but the tension kept building, like the steady rise of a wave before it crashes. And then out of nowhere, Liam broke the silence. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? His voice low, almost hesitant. It wasn't like him to ask deep questions like that. Liam wasn't the type to dwell on what ifs or could have been, but something about his tone made me pause. Different. How I asked, unsure of where he was going with this. He shrugged, not meeting my eyes this time. I don't know, like if things between us had been different there. It was that charge in the air, more palpable now. I could feel my heart beating faster, but I didn't know why. I didn't even fully understand what he meant, or maybe I did, but I didn't want to admit it. I kept my voice steady. What do you mean by that? Liam didn't answer right away. He just stood up, stretched, and said something about grabbing a drink. I watched him. He left the room feeling a strange mix of anticipation and confusion twist inside me. When he came back, he had two beers in his hands. He handed one to me without a word and sat back down on the couch, closer this time. I couldn't help but notice how close he was. Our knees were almost touching, and I felt a warmth between us that hadn't been there before. I took a sip of my beer, trying to calm the thoughts racing through my mind, but it didn't help. Liam was the first to break the silence again. We never talk about stuff, you know. Not really. I nodded, unsure of what to say. He was right. We'd always been close, but there were things we never talked about, things we danced around, but never fully acknowledged, and now it felt like those things were right in front of us, demanding to be faced. What stuff? I asked, playing dumb. Maybe if I didn't acknowledge it, it wouldn't become real. He let out a small laugh, but it didn't reach his ice. You know what I mean? I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I took another sip of beer, hoping it would numb whatever it was I was feeling. But it didn't. If anything, it only made it worse. Liam turned to face me fully now, his eyes searching mine for something I wasn't sure I could give him. It doesn't have to be weird, you know, he said softly. A swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. What doesn't this? He gestured between us. Whatever this is, it's been there for a while, hasn't it? And there it was, thieving. We'd both been avoiding the thing neither of us had dared to name, but now it was out in the open, and there was no going back. I felt a rush of emotions hit me all at once: fear, confusion, excitement. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't even know if I could. But Liam wasn't waiting for me to say anything. He just smiled, that same lopsided grin, and leaned back on the couch, as if saying it out loud had been an out. But the story didn't end there. It was only the beginning. The night stretched on, the tension between us growing thicker with every passing minute. We talked more, not about it, but about everything else. Memories from childhood, school, things we hadn't thought about in years. It felt like we were dancing around something much bigger, something inevitable, but neither of us was willing to make the first move. At some point, I suggested we go to bed. It was late, and I couldn't stand the tension anymore. I thought maybe if we slept, things would go back to normal in the morning, But as he headed to my room, Liam followed. You mind if I crash in your room tonight? His voice casual, but there was something behind his words that made my heart race. We hadn't shared a room since we were kids, but I didn't see any reason to say no. Yeah, sure, I replied, trying to sound normal, but things didn't feel normal anymore, not at all. I didn't think much of it when Liam asked to crash in my room. We'd shared rooms countless times when we were younger, but something about this time felt different. There was a tension between us, something unspoken that neither of us wanted to confront but both felt creeping in. He tossed his stuff onto the floor near the foot of my bed and flopped down next to me, arms behind his head, staring up at the ceiling. We didn't say much at first, just lay there in the dark. The only sound being the soft rustle of the covers. As we adjusted ourselves, I could feel him close by the mattress, sinking slightly under his weight, and I found myself hyper-aware of every small movement. It was strange. Usually, when we were around each other, there was a kind of ease and unspoken understanding, but now it felt like every breath, every shift in bed, every glance between us had a new weight to it. I tried to focus on anything else, but my thoughts kept circling back to the earlier conversation in the living room. He hadn't said much, but the implications were there, heavy and undeniable. I didn't want to think too much about it, didn't want to overanalyze every little thing he'd said, but it was hard not to. Eventually Liam spoke, his voice cutting through the thick silence like a knife. Do you remember when we were kids and we used to talk all night about the stupidest things? His voice was softer, no thoughtful, as if he was trying to recapture the simplicity of those times. It feels like we haven't done that in forever. I smiled in the dark, even though he couldn't see me. Yeah, I remember we'd stay up until mom or dad yelled at us to go to sleep, and even then we'd just whisper until one of us passed out. Liam chuckled softly, the sound low and comforting. I said that. There was something wistful in his tone, something that tugged at me in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just nostalgia. There was an underlying current of something more, something deeper, that made my chest tighten. Why do you think we stopped? He asked after a moment, his voice barely above a whisper. Now, I didn't have an answer for it. Somewhere along the way, life got in the way. School friends, growing up west, stopped being kids who could stay up all night without a care in the world. But more than that, we'd grown into ourselves into different people, and maybe, just maybe, we'd both felt the tension long before either of us was ready to acknowledge it. I don't know, I finally said. I guess we just got busy, life happened. He didn't respond right away, and I wondered if he was thinking the same things I was. It was so much easier to stay silent, to avoid the uncomfortable truths lurking just beneath the surface. But then he shifted closer, just enough that our arms brushed against each other, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was such a small, innocent movement, but it sent a jolt through me. My mind raced with thoughts I didn't want to entertain, emotions I wasn't ready to confront. Do you ever wonder, what if things had been different? He asked quietly, his voice barely audible now. Asif. He was afraid of the answer. I stared up at the ceiling, my heart pounding in my chest. Different how? He hesitated, and he could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air between us. When he finally spoke again, his voice was laced with something I couldn't quite place. Uncertainty maybe, or vulnerability, like if we hadn't grown apart, if we'd stayed close, if we'd kept talking like we said to. I turned my head to look at him, but he was still staring up at the ceiling, his expression unreadable in the dim light. There was something about the way he said it, something that made me think he wasn't just talking about us as brothers. There was something more, something deeper, that I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. Liam, what are you trying to say? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his head to meet my gaze, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. There was something in his eyes that made my heart race, something that made it impossible to look away. I don't know, he finally said, his voice soft, almost uncertain. I guess I just missed the way things used to be. His words hung in the air between us, heavy and charged with an emotion I couldn't quite name. I wanted to say something to break the tension that had been building between us all night, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, we lay there, insolence, the distance between us both vast and impossible. Like close. The minutes ticked by, and I could feel myself getting lost in my thoughts, me mind racing with questions I didn't want to ask, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, something that couldn't be undone. Eventually, I closed my eyes, hoping that sleep would come and take me away from the confusion swirling in my head, but it didn't. Instead, I lay there, hyper aware of every breath, every shift of the bed, every brush of his arm against mine. After what felt like an eternity, Liam shifted again, turning onto his side to face me. I could feel his eyes on me, even though mine were still closed and intuitive. His gaze made my heart race. You're not asleep, are you? He asked, his voice low and soft, barely more than a whisper. I opened my eyes and turned my head to meet his gaze. No, he smiled, a small lopsided grin that I'd seen 1,000 times before, but it Felt different now, more intimate somehow. Me neither. There was something in the way he was looking at me, something that made my heart pound in my chest. It wasn't just the usual brotherly affection. There was something more, something that made the air between us feel thick with unspoken words. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to respond to the intensity of his gaze, so I did what I always did. When I didn't know what to say, I deflected. "We should probably get some sleep," I said, my voice sounding much steadier than I felt. But Liam didn't move, he didn't even look away. "Yeah," he agreed softly, "we should." But neither of us made a move to close our eyes, to turn away, to end the night. We just stayed there, lying side by side, the silence between us growing heavier with every passing second. And that's when I realized something. It wasn't just me who felt it, Liam felt it too. That pull, that tension, that thing neither of us had the words for, but both of us knew was there. It wasn't just in my head, there was more between us than either of us had been willing to admit, and that scared me. But it also excited me in a way I didn't fully understand. Eventually, Liam broke the silence. "I don't want things to go back to normal," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you?" I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know how to answer that. I didn't even know what the right answer was. But I knew one thing for sure: things weren't going back to normal, not after tonight. And somehow deep down, I didn't want them to. The night felt endless, stretched between moments that made my skin prickle with something I couldn't quite name. As we lay there side by side, I could feel Liam's breathing slow, steady, like he was trying to calm himself down, but I could sense the undercurrent of tension. The quiet between us felt loaded, as if every word we hadn't said was waiting to burst out, filling the room with an unspoken intensity. We weren't just lying there, though the space between us felt thinner, smaller, like gravity was pulling us towards something neither of us had been prepared for. He shifted, his arm brushing against mine, and for a moment I thought it was accidental, but then he did it again, and this time it was deliberate. His hand found mine under the covers, his fingers tentative at first, before closing around mine. The room felt too quiet, the air thick with what was about to happen. It wasn't just a touch, it was something more, something that had been building for what felt like forever. And now it was too late to pretend otherwise. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, my thoughts a tangled mess of confusion and excitement. Liam's voice, soft and low, broke through the quiet. "Do you want this?" he asked, his fingers tightening just slightly around mine. It was a question, yes, but there was something in his tone that told me he already knew the answer. I couldn't speak, my throat felt dry, my mind racing too fast for me to form a coherent thought. So I just nodded, and that was all I needed. He turned to face me fully now, his eyes searching mine for something, and I could see the same hesitation, the same uncertainty mirrored in his gaze. But there was something else too, something deeper, more intense, something we had both been avoiding for so long. Neither of us could escape anymore. His hand slid up my arm, slow, deliberate, as if he was testing the boundaries of whatever this was between us. I could feel my skin tingling under his touch, a shiver running down my spine as his fingers trailed higher, brushing against my neck. It was subtle, but it was an autoset, my heart racing even faster. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to do, so I just stayed still, letting him take the lead. His hand moved from my neck to my jaw, tilting my head slightly so that our eyes met, and I could see the same emotion swirling in his gaze, the fear, the excitement, the need. And then he kissed me. It wasn't sudden, wasn't rushed, it was slow, almost hesitant, like he was giving me a chance to pull away if I wanted to, but I didn't, I couldn't. I kissed him back, the feeling off his lips on mine sending a jolt of electricity through me. It was soft at first, tentative, but as the seconds ticked by it grew more intense, more desperate. His hand moved to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and I found myself leaning into him, my body responding to his in ways I hadn't expected. But the kiss wasn't the end of it, it was just the beginning. Liam pulled back slightly, his breath warm against my lips. "Are you sure?" he asked again, his voice barely more than a whisper, and nodded, unable to form words. My mind was spinning too fast, my heart pounding too hard for me to say anything, but I didn't need to. He could see the answer in my eyes, and that was when everything changed. He kissed me again, but this time it was different. There was no hesitation, now no holding back. His hands were on me, pulling me closer, and I could feel the heat of his body against mine. It wasn't just a kiss anymore, it was more, so much more. I wasn't sure how we got there, but before I knew it, our clothes were being shed piece by piece, until there was nothing between us. The air felt charged, every touch, every movement sending sparks through me. He moved over me, his body pressing into mine, and I could feel every inch of him, the warmth of his skin against mine, the weight of him grounding me in a way I hadn't known I needed. His lips were everywhere, on my neck, my chest, my shoulders, and each touch sent a wave of heat coursing through me. It wasn't just physical, it was deeper than that. There was something raw, something emotional in the way he touched me, in the way he looked at me. It was like he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me. And I couldn't help but feel the same. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation, everything felt right, like this was where we were supposed to be, like this was something that had been building for years and was finally coming to a head. I don't know how long we stayed like that, moving together in a dance that felt both new and familiar at the same time. Time seemed to blur. The only thing I could focus on was him, his body, his touch, the way he made me feel like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. And then, as if on some unspoken cue, we both reached that point together, the intensity of it crashing over us like a wave, leaving us both breathless and trembling in its wake. For a long moment, we just lay there tangled together, our breathing heavy in the silence of the room. Neither of us said anything, but what need to. The air between us was thick with everything we hadn't said, everything we didn't need to say. Liam was the first to move, shifting slightly so that he was lying beside me, his arms still draped across my chest. He didn't look at me, but I could feel the weight of what had just happened settling over both of us. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know if there was anything to say, but somehow deep down, I didn't regret it. He turned his head to look at me, his eyes searching mine for something reassuring, maybe, or understanding. I wasn't sure, but whatever it was, I could see the same thing reflected in his gaze. That I was feeling. This changes everything, doesn't it? He asked, his voice soft, but laced with an emotion I couldn't quite place. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. It did change everything. There was no going back now, no pretending that this hadn't happened. But even as the weight of that realization settled over me, I couldn't help but feel something else, to something I hadn't expected. Relief, because for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't hiding, I wasn't pretending, I wasn't running away from the truth of what I felt, of what we both felt. And that more than anything made me feel like maybe, just maybe, this was where I was supposed to be. The morning light seeped through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. I blinked against the brightness, trying to shake the heaviness that clung to me from sleep. For a brief moment, I forgot where I was, forgot what had happened, but in reality rushed back, and my heart skipped a beat. Liam was still next to me, his breathing soft and steady, his arm draped casually over my waist. The sight of him there so close stirred something in me, but along with that familiar warmth came a new emotion, uncertainty. What now? I turned my head slightly to look at Liam. He was still asleep, his face relaxed and peaceful, as if the world hadn't shifted under our feet for a moment. I just watched him, taking in their eyes and fall of his chest, the way his hair fell messily over his forehead. Hell looked the same, but nothing felt the same. A part of me wanted to slip out off, to create some space between us before he woke up, and we had to face the reality of what had happened. But another part of me, the part that had been driving everything between us, didn't want to move at all. I wanted to stay here in that quiet, in the safety of the moment, before the world intruded. I couldn't avoid this forever. Though Liam would wake up soon, and we'd have to talk before I could make a decision. Liam stirred beside me, his eyes fluttering open. For a second he looked disoriented, like he was still caught between sleep and wakefulness, but then his gaze found mine, and I saw the moment it all clicked into place for him. His expression softened, and a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Morning, he said, his voice rough with sleep. Morning, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was racing. We both lay there for a moment, neither of us saying anything more. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged with everything that had happened the night before, everything that still needed to be said. Liam shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look at me more closely. There was something different in his eyes, something deeper, more serious. You okay? He asked, his voice softer, now more concerned. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how to answer. That I was okay in the sense that nothing felt wrong, but he wasn't sure what to do with the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I don't regret it, Liam said, breaking silence. His words were quiet but firm, like he needed to say them. Needed to make sure I knew. I turned to face him fully now, searching his eyes for any trace of doubt or hesitation, but there was none. He was being honest. Brutally, beautifully honest. I don't either. I admitted the truth of it, surprising me, despite the confusion, the uncertainty. I didn't regret what had happened, not one bit. Liam's smile widened slightly, and the tension in the room seemed to ease just a little. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from my forehead in a gesture that felt so intimate, so familiar, that it made my heart ache. What does this mean? I asked, quiet, live question that had been burning in the back of my mind since the moment we'd woken up. The expression shifted, growing more serious. I don't know, he admitted after a moment, but I don't want to act like nothing's changed. His words echoed the very thoughts I hadn't been able to voice. I didn't want to go back to the way things were before, didn't want to erase the connection we'd found last night, but also didn't know how to move forward from here. It's complicated, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. I know, Liam replied, his hand still resting lightly against my face, but we can figure it out together. There was something so simple, so honest in his words, that it made the weight on my chest feel a little lighter. Maybe we didn't have all the answers right now, maybe we didn't need them, maybe it was Enough that we both knew what we wanted each other for a moment. We just lay there staring at each other, letting Thesulant speak for us. The world outside seemed so far away, and for the first time I felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. But a moment couldn't last forever. Eventually, we'd have to leave this room, face the reality outside of it. Prince would be back soon, and we couldn't stay in this bubble of safety and quiet indefinitely. I guess we'll have to take it one day at a time, I said, breaking the silence. Liam nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. Yeah, one day at a time. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. It was a start. As the day went on, we fell into an easy rhythm, as if nothing had changed. But everything had, every look, every touch felt charged with a new kind of intensity, and I couldn't help but notice how much closer we stayed to each other than we had before. By the time evening rolled around, I found myself feeling strangely at peace. The confusion, the fear that had clouded my thoughts earlier had settled into something quieter, something more manageable. Maybe it was because Liam had made it clear that we didn't have to figure everything out right away. We could take our time. But as the hours ticked by, a new kind of anxiety began to creep in. Prince would be home soon, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the real world was closing in on us. It was one thing to be alone with Liam, to feel like we were in our own little world, but it was another thing entirely to face the reality of what had happened, of what it meant for us going forward. When the sound of the car pulling into the driveway finally came, my stomach twisted in knots. Liam shot me look, his expression calm but serious. "You ready?" he asked. I wasn't sure I was, but I nodded anyway. What else could I do? The front door opened, and the familiar sound of our parents' voices filled the house. I could hear them chatting about their trip, laughing about some story, completely unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred in their absence. Liam and I exchanged a quick glance before heading downstairs to greet them, and as we walked side by side, I felt a strange sense of solidarity. Whatever happened next, we'd face it together. Our parents didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. They hugged us, asked us about our weekend, told us about theirs, and it all felt so normal to normal given what had happened. I kept expecting them to topic up on something, to sense that there was a change in the air, but they didn't, and that left me with a mixture of relief and unease. Was it going to be this easy to pretend to hide what had happened? As the evening wore on, I found myself retreating into my thoughts, barely paying attention to the conversation around me. Liam seemed more at ease, more comfortable with decorate, but I could feel the weight of what had happened pressing down on me, and it was getting harder to ignore. The days that followed were strange in some ways. Nothing had changed. We still went through our usual routines, still saw our friends, still laughed and joked around with our parents, but in other ways everything had changed. The secret were keeping hung over us like a shadow, coloring every interaction, every moment. At night, when the house was quiet, Liam and I would retreat to our room, and it was like the weight of the day would lift just a little. In the dark, we didn't have to pretend, we didn't have to act like nothing was different. We could just be. It became our routine during the day. We played the role of brothers, keeping everything on the surface, hiding what Webbeth knew was simmering beneath. But at night, in the quiet of our room, we let ourselves slip back into that closeness, that intensity. We didn't talk much about what had happened, didn't dissect it or try to label it, but we didn't ignore it either. It was just there, an unspoken understanding between us that this thing, whatever it was, didn't need to be rushed or defined. It just needed to be. Some night, we would lie next to each other, just talking about everything and nothing, about things we never used to discuss. Other nights, the silence between us would grow heavy with that same tension that had been building for so long, and we would find ourselves back in that space where words weren't necessary, and so it became a part of us, woven into the fabric of who we were together. There was no grand revelation or moment of reckoning, just a quiet acceptance that what we had, whatever name it might carry, was ours alone. The world outside continued its relentless pace, but in the small stolen moments we shared, time seemed to slow, allowing us to exist in a space that belonged only to us. We didn't need to explain it or seek anyone's approval. We just let it be, trusting that what we had was enough. No matter where life would take us, we knew this, our bond, our closeness, would always remain.